guess you could say I was probably the classic kind of art kid. Growing up, I was always making things or drawing and you know making whatever was on Blue Peter that week and things like that. So yeah, always a creative outlet was always part of my life when I was young. Um, I grew up in quite a creative household in terms of my parents. Um, Art and music were always kind of surrounding me. Um, so it was something that was quite a big part of who I was growing up. I feel like it's something that I found I really enjoyed. So as I say, I was surrounded by a lot of art and music and as growing up. Things like my mum would have the glasses in our house were Mondrian um, patterned, or the art on the walls or the furniture had a Macintosh theme. So it all what I understood was that functionality of items could also be beautiful, and I was interested in how that worked in terms of expressing yourself. Um, and as a child, I found that creating and making art was something that I enjoyed, but also something that allowed me to express who I was. And so, you know, I remember one of my birthdays. I was really excited to ask for an easel and proper paints and canvases and things like that, and to be able to sit in my room and actually paint and make something that expressed what I was interested in. I found really exciting when I was young. And that developed right through into my school career. And to the point where in high school art was my main interest academically. I enjoyed, science subjects and English and things like that, but art was always the number one, right through until my last years of high school. There was quite a large gap between school and art becoming my career. So I left school in sixth year, having done art right up until the end of high school, and I started my foundation year, and halfway through it had a bit of a kind of crisis of, I don't know if it's a crisis of confidence, or I couldn't quite pin down what I was going to do with art, like as a job, so to speak. And at that point in your life, people are telling you, what's your job going to be, or asking you what your job's going to be, or, and being an artist isn't necessarily something you're told is a job that you can do that's acceptable necessarily. And so I had a bit of a moment there where, so I ended up not completing my foundation year, and I got a proper job instead. So I actually worked for Glasgow City Council for 12 years. I had my family in that time and kind of didn't make anything other than, as a parent, with kids, creative projects with them and things like that. But I didn't really fulfil any creative urges within myself for that whole time, from the age of 20 until 30. So a decade of kind of suppressing it, until my partner Sam kind of encouraged me out of that and to really pursue what I felt I should. It feels like something you should be doing when you have a creative outlet. It's not something you can suppress for very long. So at the age of 30, I decided I had the opportunity through my job to have a redundancy, and that gave me some time to pursue an art career on my own. So I always say I'm self-taught. Obviously I did have an art education up until the age of 19. I see the experience of life in that 10 years has kind of set me up and educated me in a different way, in that I have experiences to talk about in my art. So it was at the age of 30 that I pursued, thankfully, successfully, beginning an art career. It was scary to, leave what is a proper job. I'm quite sure most people that knew me thought I was off my head, giving up a career. I had been in that job for a long time and was doing well, but I wasn't happy in it. So it was frightening to go through that process and put faith in what might happen, because you can never guess. But it felt really, really good at the same time. Like, it felt really freeing, being able to express who I really was again, because it feels like that is who I am, is tied up in art and creativity. So it felt like a real coming back to myself. So yeah, my influences art-wise, in terms of art movements and artists that I feel inspired by. I was telling you earlier how, because I didn't go to art school, I've not done a huge amount of studying of the history of art and different movements. So it's all really through reading by interest, picking up books and investigating different artists off my own back. And so I've found some really interesting artists that have kind of come with me through the different stages of my process. So Helen Frankenthaler, in terms of her process of soap stain techniques that she, I think, can be given the title of having invented, that really led me into investigating how materials can be used in different ways, and led me to the current process that I use in terms of inks and how they behave on canvas. Her process was slightly different because it was oils that she used, but I've kind of just taken inspiration from that process. I really love the artists of the St Ives movement. So Barbara Hepworth, William Graham, and I think what it is about those artists, there's a lot of different artists that come into that group, and it's the simplicity in which, restraint in terms of colour palette or mark, that I find really interesting. Really distilling what you want to say in your work down to what you feel is important, and things being quite simple and clean, and at times technical, like technical drawings. A lot of Barbara Hepworth's drawings that was going to an exhibition last year in Edinburgh, of her work, and it showed such a broad range of her work, and from her sculptures works into paintings and drawings, and all the different technical elements I found fascinating. So I feel like I try and pull these sorts of influences into my own practice. In a broader sense, the influences in what are the narratives of my work is really rooted in place and landscape, in a few different ways. So the tangibility of landscape, geology, the building blocks of the earth, wildlife, how the landscape looks, all feeds in, but also place in a more community sense. so how we interact with each other and the place that we're in terms of relationships, connecting, and how that makes you care about a place. So if you have a deep understanding and relationship with a place, then you're more likely to care for it. And that's really the root of what I make art about. It's communicating these sorts of ways to build relationship with place and experience, and in turn work really hard to protect it. Yeah, that's not something I've thought about in depth until you just asked it. I do think light affects me hugely, actually, and I think all of us really, it's a widely accepted part of our kind of psyche now that in winter we're all a bit sad because it's dark. And actually, I've experienced that quite impactfully this winter. I've had some mental health, problems, and it was impacted quite severely this winter. And I realise, with the return of spring and the return of the light, how hugely that affects my entire being. And I think it's really important, and what I've tried to do a lot is seek out light. And so, like through the winter, to actually get outside and that small gap you've got of light in Scotland, and make the most of it. In terms of my work, I think I do try to harness that kind of lightness in my images as a whole. I'm more drawn in the last couple of years to leaving quite a lot of space around the canvas, so I'll leave negative space to bring lightness. And also the washes of inks that I use are almost always transparent. Obviously, the more they build up, the more opaque they become, but it's just filtering that light through the colour. Light is really important, and I think that is something that attracted me as well to the kind of St Ives style, is that's obviously comes through in these artists' works, and that really crystal clear clarity of light. So being from Scotland, I feel is something I feel really proud of. Struggled a lot in my life with feeling like I belong, but in a more localised way. Something that I do, themes that I explore a lot in my practice. But in terms of Scotland as a country and being from this country, I've always felt really proud of that, and that I feel a belonging to Scotland. It's such a rich and diverse country in terms of nature and landscape and geology and people. I feel really proud to be from here. And that's kind of fed through to these kind of explorations of feelings of connection and belonging to place that run throughout my work. I grew up in quite an urban area in Central Belt in Paisley, which I loved, but I've just never quite felt. I kind of lived on the edge, the border between two towns, so Paisley and Renfrew, and I literally for the last 15 years lived on the border. Like my neighbours across the road were in a different town to me, which was quite an interesting manifestation of that feeling of being on the edge. And so I never really felt this deep belonging in where I lived. Myself and my partner were really keen to move to a more kind of rural, community-minded place. which took a long time to come to fruition, just with family and things like that. And so at the end of 2022, we made the move to the Isle of Bute, where we've now been for 18 months. And I can honestly say that I've never felt more at home anywhere than I do here. It's an incredible feeling, and something that we didn't quite expect fully. You can't know that until you live in a place for a certain time, I think. But it was really quick how at home we felt here, and a lot of that is to do with the people that we've met since we came here, but the island itself and the landscape and the nature and wildlife. It's the feeling of home and kind of acceptance here is really strong. I think I got my first tattoo when I was 19. It doesn't really mean anything, and you can't really see it. So, yeah, that was my first foray into having a tattoo. But more recently, in the last 2 years, I have got more visible tattoos. I feel like it's quite as an artist, as a job, it feels entirely acceptable to have really visible tattoos. As you can see, this one here and this one here. Historically, a lot of employers aren't entirely happy with as visible tattoos as I have, but I felt, I think I was 40, yeah, I think I was 40 when I had my first real, it was this one, real visible one, and it felt like quite an empowering thing to do, I guess. But in terms of the actual artwork, so you can see this is like a kind of botanical wrap around my arm, and it says something about who I am, and it's a conversation starter, which I feel similarly about my artwork. It's like to think that it sparks a conversation, because what is that and what does that mean and what do you get from that? So having visible art on me, I feel it's an expression. But I also feel both times that I've had these quite visible tattoos, I've put a lot of trust in the artist, and I've sought out an artist as opposed to, because you can get a tattoo artist and someone who will tattoo you with whatever motif you choose. But both of these were designed and drawn by an artist. I just gave them an idea of what I wanted and left the whole rest of the thing to them. And I feel really, really proud to have such beautiful work from another artist permanently on my body. This one here is my most recent, and features a hermit crab, which I kind of identify with in terms of going about trying to find your home. So yeah. I feel quite strongly, and increasingly so, that art shouldn't be frozen in time. I think in the age we live in, with climate change and things like that, that nothing should be permanent. We shouldn't be making things that will last forever. But similarly, so art shouldn't just be on your wall and be untouchable and screened and fenced off. We had spoken earlier when I was making you a coffee about how the functionality of art in your everyday life. Why shouldn't the things you use every day be art? The cup that we're drinking water out of here was thrown by my friend, who's a ceramicist. The pot that the tea bags are in the kitchen is a beautiful handmade pot. And like I mentioned earlier, when I was young, the glasses that we drank from at home were Mondrian designed, Mondrian themed. He didn't design them, I'm sure. Um, the chairs at our dining room table had Child Rennie Mackintosh structure in the back. I think it's important that it's something that's intrinsic to your life. It shouldn't just be you only see art in a gallery or a museum. It should be part of your life. There's no reason it shouldn't be. And I think that's something that I feel when I'm making a painting, I feel more like I'm making an object, in terms of it not being just an image, a two-dimensional image. I build the canvas stretcher bars, I stretch the canvas, prime the canvas, and use the site like it's an object rather than just a flat image. I try to bring depth and dimension in with the layers of the inks and the marks that I'm making, so that it's a more tangible item rather than something that's on your wall that you're scared to touch. So music is a huge part of my life. Growing up, my dad was in the music industry, so I've always been exposed to a huge variety of music. Quite an eclectic taste, even as a young child. Fleetwood Mac was my favourite band when I was like 5, and it's just grown from there. Like I've always said, if anyone asks me what genre of music I like, I can't answer that because I just like all music. My Spotify playlist is insane, and so I'm always listening to music of some kind. But yeah, it's, I guess when I'm making, it is quite particular what I can and can't listen to. I really love contemporary Scottish trad, so young kind of trad bands, still fiddles and bagpipes and the likes, but it's much more contemporary in nature, much more fresh and modern. I still like the proper trad stuff, but contemporary trad is our kind of biggest love, music-wise. However, lyrically, I'm fascinated by how people write music, write lyrics, and how they can allow the audience to paint a picture in their mind using words, which as a visual artist, it's like a different league. I can't. That's why I make images, because I can't always articulate with words what I really want to say, and so I find music a fascinating way of producing art that is lyrics are just allow you to transcend to somewhere else in your mind. So that's what I listen to a lot at the beginning of my process. Will be lyrical works. I also listen to audiobooks alongside that. Similarly, it's just how people can use words to articulate the same sorts of themes that I'm trying to make visual art about. A lot of it is nature based, songs as well as books. I really love Corinne Polwart, who is a Scottish composer, lyricist, singer, and she does a fabulous job of storytelling through her songs about landscape, all sorts of really wildly interesting things like space and geology and fascinating things to be learned from listening to songs. So at the beginning of my process, I do like to bring a lot of those sorts of outside influences in. while I'm making, because the first kind of layers of my work are so free and organic. It doesn't take an awful lot of me trying to decide what I'm trying to do. It's much more free, and so I can use those influences at the beginning. As time goes on and I'm trying to really respond to each layer, I'll move to more instrumental music, because I like to I still get quite a lot of visual stimulus from instrumental music. So again, kind of Scottish trad bands like Elephant Sessions, Rura, where I can visualise landscapes and experiences through just those notes and those instruments. And so as I'm having to think more about the marks and how I'm going to bring the next layers to my paintings, I find the instrumental is more conducive to that part of my process. So yeah, it's hugely important. So currently I work with inks and various mixed media, but ink is my main medium, which has not always been the case. So when I started making art 10, 11 years ago, I was using woven textiles, mainly Harris tweed. And I was making geological maps and diagrams from Harris tweed, which in itself, when you say it out loud, sounds a bit mad. But it kind of just all made sense to me at the time. I had developed a real interest in geology. My partner studied geology at university, and when we started going out together and exploring Scotland, it's something you can't really get away from. Is oh my God, why do these hills exist and why do they look like this? And so my interest in geology really peaked at the same time that I started making art. Harris tweed being as it is, it was really inspired by the landscape and historically dyed with natural elements of the landscape. And so in my mind, it all really fitted together. What I loved about textiles was the ability to be really precise with what I was making. And I was cutting out all little bits of tweed, fitting them together. It was quite a prescriptive process. And I got really lovely colours and textures, and I used a sewing machine to bring even further texture in, contour lines, and it was a really tactile medium to use. However, it also took its toll physically on me as the work got bigger. The demands on my body increased as well, and actually it became quite a painful process in the end. I think my last textile commission was over 3 metres in length, and it took quite a lot of physical effort. But also I started to feel a little bit restricted in terms of colours. You're restricted by what the weavers are weaving at that time, and so I became increasingly interested in the part of my process that came before cutting tweeds, which was painting. So I've always painted as part of my process, but until that point it was just I sketched in paint before I moved on to the final works. And so I decided to take some time out of my practice, which similarly to when I left my proper job to become an artist, people thought I was a bit mad for abandoning this really successful process that I had, because it was different and I really liked it. But I just began to feel a bit unfulfilled creatively by it. And so I took a year out and explored painting. Did a lot of learning and came to this technique that I've been using with the dilute inks, and I've been using and exploring and developing that process for the last 4 years now. So yeah, I see my paintings similarly to the process that I went through in making the textile works. You know, them being maps and scientific kind of data-driven pieces. I kind of see my paintings in a similar light as being map-like, but more maps of experience rather than descriptive descriptions of landscape. I would say the biggest part of my development process for any painting, I tend to work more in a series of paintings. I don't just work on one painting at a time. So I guess I describe my process as quite it's like fits and bursts, it seems. I don't paint every day. So the biggest part of my process, I would say, is the actual going out and experiencing the things that I'm making art about. So it's getting out every day for a walk, or a swim, or a kayak, or going bird watching, reading books about the subjects that I'm interested in, researching things. A massive amount of my time is spent just filling my cup with all that stuff, and then the process of, okay, how will this actually come out and be a tangible thing to communicate with people. So a lot of that doesn't always look like work, but that is, I would say, that's the biggest and most important part of my process. Following that, I then start to work in a sketchbook, but I don't necessarily take my sketchbook out and make sketches from life. Sometimes I'll do that to get, I think we all tend to have the urge to make an image that looks like, especially if it's place-based, it looks like the place that you're making about. So sometimes I will do a little landscape sketch just to get that out of my system, pin down some marks and colours and shapes. But I then build like a kind of palette of colour, but also of marks, shapes that I feel can be put together to bring this map-like quality to be read about the experience or the subject that I'm making art about. I then spend a lot of time mixing, pre-mix all my inks. All the different colours are mixed. I have lots of jars and things with all my different colours in, and I'll make like a big test sheet with all my colours and marks. I do a lot of mark making in my sketchbooks, just to try and pin down what marks really say or represent the different elements that I'm trying to convey. So it could be light dancing on the surface of the water, or the movement of the water, the waves, the currents, different elements. So I'll test a lot of different marks. So there is a long process there before I'll start cutting canvas and building stretchers, and so there's a huge amount of work before I then lay everything out to start actually pouring the first layers of ink onto the canvases. And the painting itself happens in quite a concentrated space of time. I'll paint, because I take over the whole house when I'm painting as well. I tend to work on a lot of different pieces at the same time. I'll work on them all day, every day. Each layer I'd let dry overnight, and so everything will get one layer. It will dry overnight, and in that time, that allows me the kind of slowness to then consider. I'll observe each piece and see what the ink is doing, because a lot of it is down to chance. What will happen when the ink settles and dries? I can, I can tweak it and tilt it and push it around a little bit. So I then, each layer, I respond to the next, until there comes a point where I feel happy with that composition, and the elements of, telling the story that I intend. So my first piece of advice from a personal level is never think it's too late. Um, it's a tale as old as time. You hear, a lot of artists who start really late in life. But for me, I thought I had left it too late because I didn't go to art school straight from school, and take the traditional path. Um, it's never too late to, because it's in you. So it's just the right time and place for you to tap into it. The next thing would be get out and talk to people. Go to the things, go to the openings, go to the shows, go to the artist talks, talk to people, make connections, community. Only good things come from, getting to know people and talking to people. And finally, I would say, going back to my process, experience stuff. Don't just stay in your studio every day and paint, because you'll run out of things to paint about. So get out, do things, build a relationship with nature, build a relationship with your community, and you'll find that you have infinite amounts of things to make art about as a result.